You've been through hell. The kind of years that break people: isolation, loss, identity crisis, the slow, grinding feeling that life is punishing you for existing. But what if I told you Carl Jung discovered something that changes everything about how we understand these hardest years? He found that your suffering isn't random. It's not punishment. It's a specific psychological process with a purpose. And Jung found that with the right understanding, people don't just survive their darkest years. They can emerge from them transformed into something the world has never seen before. If you're coming out of the hardest years of your life right now, what I'm about to show you will completely change what those years meant. Because Jung discovered that the very darkness you've been fighting is the raw material of your greatest becoming. But he also warned this process is dangerous. It requires a strong enough ego to withstand the dissolution. For those who can hold the tension, transformation becomes possible. Here's what most people don't understand about hardship. They think it's something to escape, to overcome, to put behind them as quickly as possible. But Jung spent decades developing a framework for understanding what happens to people during their darkest periods. What he found terrified him at first. Then it revolutionized how we understand human transformation. Jung rediscovered the ancient alchemical concept of the nigredo, the blackening. Drawing from alchemical symbolism, this represents the stage where everything breaks down. Your identity dissolves. Your old beliefs burn away. Everything you thought you knew about yourself gets reduced to ash. The hardest years of your life aren't a detour from your path. They are the path. Jung's writings emphasize that the nigredo represents an essential first stage of psychological transformation. Without it, you remain stuck in a false version of yourself, a persona built on what others expect, a mask that slowly suffocates who you really are. Think about what happens during the hardest years. You lose things. Relationships end. Careers collapse. Health fails. Identity shatters. In his clinical work, Jung identified patterns showing that people who went through this darkness and understood what was happening didn't just recover. They became fundamentally different, stronger, wiser, more themselves than they had ever been. This is where most psychology gets it completely wrong. Modern approaches want to eliminate suffering, medicate it, therapy it away, make you feel better as quickly as possible. But Jung realized something radical. He wrote that there is no coming to consciousness without pain. Suffering itself is doing something essential. During your hardest years, something was happening beneath the surface. Your psyche was destroying everything that wasn't authentically you. Every false belief, every borrowed identity, every role you played to make others comfortable. The nigredo burns it all down. Jung called this the night sea journey. You descend into darkness, into the unknown waters of your own unconscious. And down there, in that terrifying depth, you confront what you've been avoiding your entire life. Your shadow, the parts of yourself you've denied, the truths you've been too afraid to face. This confrontation isn't gentle. It feels like death, because in a very real sense, it is death. The death of the false self you used to be. The death of the comfortable lies you told yourself. The death of the version of you that couldn't handle reality. The ego must be relativized, not destroyed, moved from the center of your psyche so the authentic self can emerge. But here's the one thing most people miss. The thing that determines whether these years destroy you or transform you. You have to understand what the darkness is for. Jung's framework reveals that the nigredo isn't random suffering. It's purposeful dissolution. The psyche is breaking you down so it can rebuild you into something capable of wholeness. Let me show you how this actually works. Jung studied alchemy not as primitive chemistry, but as a symbolic map of psychological transformation. The alchemists weren't really trying to turn lead into gold. They were describing the process of turning the base material of ordinary consciousness into the gold of integrated awareness. And that process always begins with nigredo. The death phase. You cannot skip this stage. You cannot avoid it. Anyone who tries to become whole without passing through the darkness ends up spiritually inflated, psychologically fragmented. Living a lie they've convinced themselves is enlightenment. The hardest years force you into the nigredo, whether you want it or not. Life pushes you into the fire. Relationships betray you. Dreams collapse. Everything you built comes crashing down. And in that moment, you have a choice. You can resist. You can try to rebuild the old version of yourself. Try to go back to who you were before. Or you can surrender to the process. You can let the fire do its work. Let everything that isn't essentially you burn away. This surrender isn't giving up. It's the most courageous thing you'll ever do, because it means facing the terrifying truth that you don't know who you are anymore. Throughout his practice, Jung encountered patterns in patients who came to him broken by their hardest years: depression, anxiety, complete psychological collapse. And he didn't try to put them back together the way they were before. He helped them understand that they were in the middle of a transformation, that their breakdown was actually a breakthrough disguised as catastrophe. Consider a narrative illustration based on patterns Jung consistently observed. A woman enters analysis in her late 30s. She's lost everything: divorce, career failure, health crisis. She describes feeling like she's dying. Jung doesn't reassure her. He tells her she is dying, the version of her that lived for others' approval. Empaths aren't broken, they're alchemists in progress. The Alchemist's Path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. That denied her own truth, that played the role of perfect daughter, perfect wife, perfect professional. That version is dying, and it needs to die. This sounds harsh, even cruel. But Jung understood something most therapists miss. Real transformation requires the death of the false self, not physical death. Not total ego destruction. The complete dissolution of false identity so authentic self can emerge. The ego remains as the center of consciousness, but it's no longer the center of the entire psyche. Here's what happens when you resist the nigredo, when you fight against your hardest years instead of understanding them. You stay stuck. You keep trying to rebuild what was. You medicate the pain, distract yourself, blame others, play victim, and you never transform. You never discover who you actually are beneath all the conditioning. Jung's theoretical framework suggests that people who avoid their legitimate suffering end up in what he called neurosis, a state of permanent psychological tension. Trying to maintain an identity that no longer fits, suppressing truths that keep trying to emerge, living a half-life because they refuse to die and be reborn. But the people who understood what their hardest years were for, who recognized they were in the nigredo, who let the fire burn away everything false, they emerged transformed. Jung called this individuation, becoming a psychological individual, discovering and living from your authentic self. This is the payoff. This is what your hardest years were building toward, not just recovery, not just getting back to normal. Complete transformation into someone you've never been before, someone more real, more powerful, more alive. Jung wrote that the goal of individuation is wholeness, not perfection, not becoming better than others. Wholeness means integrating all the parts of yourself you've been denying, your shadow, your weaknesses, your uncomfortable truths. When you do this, you stop living a fragmented life. You become complete. And here's the crucial part. This wholeness gives you something the world desperately needs. Jung believed that individuals who complete their transformation become agents of cultural renewal. In Jungian psychology, these individuals are known as culture carriers. They bring new consciousness into the world. They show others what's possible. They become living proof that the darkest years can produce the brightest becoming. Think about what this means for you right now. If you're in the middle of your hardest years, you're not being punished. You're being forged. The fire you're in isn't destroying you. It's purifying you. If you've recently emerged from those years, you're sitting on gold you haven't recognized yet. The struggles you went through weren't wasted. They were essential. Every moment of pain was the psyche doing its work. But you have to do the work of integration. This is where most people fail. They survive their darkest years, but never transform from them. They don't take the next step. They don't ask what the suffering was trying to teach them. They don't integrate the shadow they encountered. They just try to move on and forget. Jung was explicit about this. The nigredo must be followed by integration. The death must lead to rebirth. The breakdown must become breakthrough. If you stop at the destruction phase, you remain in chaos. The gold stays hidden in the ashes. So how do you actually do this? How do you turn your hardest years into the fuel for transformation? Jung gave us specific tools, specific practices, ways to work with the unconscious material that's been stirred up by your suffering. First, you have to face your shadow. During your hardest years, you encountered parts of yourself you didn't want to see. Rage, desperation, selfishness, weakness, cruelty, cowardice. Most people repress these encounters, push them back down, pretend they never saw those aspects of themselves. But Jung taught that the shadow contains your power. The qualities you've denied are the exact qualities you need for wholeness. Your rejected anger might be the boundary-setting ability you've been missing. Your hidden selfishness might be the self-care you desperately need. Jungians call this the golden shadow. The positive, powerful traits you relegated to the darkness because you were taught they were unacceptable. Here's what actually happens when you deny these parts. They don't disappear. They operate in darkness. They sabotage you from the unconscious. They leak out in moments of stress. They get projected onto others, making you see in them the very qualities you refuse to see in yourself. Think about the last time someone triggered intense hatred in you. What quality did they display that you found unbearable? There's a strong chance that quality exists in you too. Not in the same way, not to the same degree, but somewhere in your shadow, that capacity lives. And until you acknowledge it, it owns you. Shadow integration means looking at what you discovered about yourself during your darkest moments and saying yes. Yes, that's part of me too. Not with shame, not with judgment, with acceptance. This is terrifying work. Your ego wants to maintain the illusion that you're only the good parts. But wholeness requires embracing everything. Jung said that we don't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The moment you stop running from your shadow is the moment you reclaim your power, because all that energy you were using to suppress suddenly becomes available for living. Your darkness integrated becomes your greatest strength. Second, you have to find the meaning in your suffering. This doesn't mean justifying what happened to you. It doesn't mean pretending abuse was good or that injustice was deserved. It means asking what the experience revealed, what it forced you to confront, what it taught you about yourself and life. Throughout his career, Jung worked with people who had suffered tremendously: war trauma, abuse, devastating loss. He never minimized their pain, but he helped them find psychological meaning in their experience. Not cosmic meaning, not religious justification, personal meaning. The ways their suffering had changed them, the strengths it had forced them to develop. Here's what Jung understood. When pain has no meaning, it's unbearable. It becomes pure torture. Random suffering breaks people, But when you can see purpose in your struggle, the same pain becomes transformative. Not easier, not pleasant, but purposeful, endurable, even generative. Your hardest years stripped away comfortable illusions. They showed you who really cares about you. They revealed which values actually matter. They forced you to discover strengths you didn't know you had. These revelations are the meaning. This forced growth is what makes the pain worthwhile. We see this dynamic clearly in the story of a composite pattern Jung identified. A man loses everything in midlife: business collapse, bankruptcy, public humiliation. For months he's in agony, convinced his life is over. But slowly he begins to see what the loss revealed. His business success had been built on workaholism, a desperate need to prove himself. The bankruptcy destroyed the false structure he'd built his identity on. And in that destruction, he discovered who he actually was beneath all the striving. Someone who valued creativity over profit, connection over status. The loss forced him to confront truths he'd been avoiding for decades. This is the meaning Jung spoke about, not some grand cosmic plan, but the very real ways that suffering changes your understanding. When you can find this meaning, your suffering stops being just pain. It becomes the raw material of transformation. Third, you have to live the truth you discovered. This is the hardest part. During your darkest years, you saw through a lot of lies. Lies you told yourself, lies others told you, lies society sells as truth. You saw what actually matters, what's real, what's authentic. But when you emerge from the darkness, there's enormous pressure to forget what you saw, to go back to playing the game, to rebuild the comfortable persona, to pretend you don't know what you know. Your family wants the old you back. Your friends preferred who you were before. Society has no place for people who've seen through its illusions. Jung called this the greatest betrayal of the individuation process. When you deny the truth your suffering revealed, you turn your hardest years into wasted pain. You had the gold in your hands and you threw it away because it was easier to go back to lead. Living your truth means making different choices. Setting boundaries you couldn't set before. Saying no to relationships that demand you be less than whole. Speaking truths you used to swallow. Walking away from situations that require you to betray yourself. This isn't selfish. It's necessary. You didn't survive your hardest years just to go back to the life that was killing you. The fire burned away your tolerance for inauthenticity. But living your truth doesn't mean being cruel. It doesn't mean forcing your insights on others. It means quietly, firmly, consistently choosing to be real, to honor what you discovered. People will notice. Some will be threatened. They'll call you changed, not yourself anymore. They're right. You're not yourself anymore. You're more yourself than you've ever been. The self they knew was a mask. The real you is what emerged from the fire. Fourth, you have to serve something larger than yourself. Jung discovered that individuals who complete their transformation naturally begin to help others, from genuine understanding that their suffering equipped them for a specific kind of service. This is how the alchemical process completes. The gold that's been created in you doesn't exist just for you. You become a guide, not because you're perfect, because you've been to the depths and returned. Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is becoming who you truly are. But that privilege comes with a responsibility to use what you've learned, to embody what you've become. This is what separates those who merely survive their hardest years from those who are transformed by them. Survivors try to forget, try to move on, try to return to normal. The transformed integrate what happened, own what they discovered, live from their new understanding, and in doing so, they become beacons for others still. In darkness, your hardest years weren't punishment. They were initiation. You were being initiated into a deeper level of consciousness, a more authentic way of being, a life lived from wholeness instead of fragmentation. But initiation only works if you complete the process. If you take what the darkness gave you and bring it into the light. If you let the death you experience become rebirth. If you allow the lead of your suffering to transform into the gold of integrated consciousness. The alchemists understood this. After the nigredo comes the albedo, the whitening, the emergence of clarity. Jung often focused on the three main stages, but the full alchemical map includes the citrinitas, the yellowing, and finally the rubedo, the reddening, the full integration, the birth of the philosophical gold. Your hardest years were the nigredo, the necessary death, the dissolution. But that was only the first stage. Now comes the work of integration, of allowing the new self to emerge, of bringing the gold into the world. Jung spent his entire career studying this process. He went through his own dark night, his own confrontation with the unconscious, his own nigredo. From 1913 to 1919, he descended into what he called his confrontation with the unconscious. Visions, voices, experiences that nearly destroyed him. And what he discovered in that darkness changed psychology forever. He found that the psyche has its own wisdom, its own timing, its own process of transformation. He learned that the unconscious isn't just a dumping ground for repressed material. It's a creative force, a source of renewal, a wellspring of potential. Your hardest years weren't a mistake. They were the psyche's way of forcing you to grow, to change, to become who you actually are instead of who you've been pretending to be. And here's the beautiful truth Jung left us, the one thing that makes all the suffering worth it. When you complete this transformation, when you integrate your shadow and live your truth and become whole, you don't just change your own life, you change the lives of everyone around you. Because integrated people create different energy. They don't play the games everyone else plays. They don't need to control or manipulate. They don't project their shadow onto others. They show up as whole human beings. And that wholeness is contagious. Jung called this the unconscious influence of the individuated person. You don't have to preach. You don't have to teach. Your very presence begins to shift the consciousness of those around you. You become living proof that transformation is possible, that wholeness is achievable, that the hardest years can produce the most profound becoming. This is the payoff, not wealth, not status, not even happiness in the conventional sense. The payoff is becoming real, becoming whole, becoming authentically yourself, and discovering that this authentic self has gifts the world desperately needs. Your hardest years gave you something most people never develop. Psychological depth, emotional resilience, hard-earned wisdom, the ability to hold darkness and light simultaneously, the capacity to see through illusion. These aren't small things. These are the qualities that create leaders, healers, artists, and visionaries. These are the characteristics of people who change the world, not through external power, through internal integration. Jung's message is clear. Stop running from your hardest years. Stop trying to forget them. Instead, mine them for gold. Extract the wisdom. Integrate the shadow. Claim the strength you were forced to develop. Because the world doesn't need more people who've avoided suffering. It needs people who've been through the fire and emerged transformed. It needs whole human beings who can hold complexity and truth. Your hardest years are about to pay off. But only if you understand this one thing. The suffering wasn't the point. The transformation was the point. The breaking down was necessary for the building up. The death was required for the rebirth. Jung spent decades documenting this entire process, watching people descend into darkness, helping them understand what was happening, guiding them toward integration. And over, he witnessed the same miracle. People who understood their suffering as nigredo didn't just survive, they thrived. They became more than they ever imagined possible. They discovered capacities they didn't know existed within themselves, resilience they never knew they possessed, wisdom they couldn't have gained any other way. The fire had transformed them into something genuinely stronger and more real. This is your inheritance. This is what Jung's work offers you. Not a way to avoid suffering, not a technique to feel better quickly, but a map of transformation, a recognition that your hardest years weren't random pain, but purposeful process. So if you're in the fire right now, know this. You're not being destroyed, you're being refined. The heat you feel is burning away everything false. What remains will be pure gold. And if you've emerged from the fire, your work isn't done. Now comes integration. Now comes living from your new understanding. Now comes the responsibility of being a whole person in a fragmented world. The hardest years are about to pay off. Not in the way you thought, not in comfort or ease or the absence of struggle. They pay off in transformation, in wholeness, in becoming who you were always meant to be, beneath all the conditioning and fear and false identity. This is Jung's gift to you. The understanding that suffering with awareness becomes transformation, that darkness consciously embraced becomes light, that the very experiences that nearly destroyed you contain the seeds of your greatest becoming. Your hardest years weren't wasted. They were essential. They were the nigredo, the necessary death, the alchemical fire. And if you do the work of integration, if you claim the gold that was forged in that darkness, you'll discover that those years weren't the worst thing that ever happened to you. They were the making of you. If this understanding of your hardest years resonates with you, if you're ready to claim the transformation your suffering has been preparing you for, like this video and subscribe to this channel for more insights into Jung's psychology of becoming whole. The journey through darkness to light is one we're all on, and recognizing that truth connects you to others walking the same path of transformation. In The Alchemist's Path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, beautifully designed 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook, in stock now. Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get The Alchemist's Path at thesurrealmind.com.